With that, we do want to welcome Darren Heitner to, I believe, the third or fourth time he's been on Stadium and Gale with Heitner Law. You know him from Twitter. You know him as a adjunct professor at UF, and you know him as one of the architects behind Florida's NIL law. Darren, how are you doing this evening, my friend?
I'm doing great. How are you all?
Good, man. Good.
Darren, they were walking me to the altar. Thank you for showing up and saving me from that conversation.
Anytime.
Nick's been on Proposal Watch for about 3 years now. So, Darren, wanted to chat with you about a number of things, obviously NIL. But before we get into that, do want to talk to you a little bit about the Gator Guard. You were on the scoop and helped solidify the new Gator Guard, which is a new NIL collective for the University of Florida. Wanted to just chat and kind of learn a little bit more about who Gator Guard is going to be going after and kind of what their place is in the University of Florida NIL marketplace, if you will.
Yeah, it happened real fast. I think it began at the beginning of last week. I got a call from Hugh Hathcock, who introduced himself in that first call. We had never spoken before. And he definitely let me know about that very generous donation he had previously made to the university, that $12.6 million to the athletic department. But we got to talking about beyond just what he and his colleagues could do for the athletic department to NIL, and whether or not Florida was competitive enough, but that wasn't even sufficient. It was to be a complete leader, to be at the top of the pack. And so we got to talking, brainstorming what that would look like, including just spitballing names. I mean, we didn't actually come up with the Gator Guard name until the night before he started hitting the ground running and raising money. So I think I woke up the next day. It was Wednesday or Thursday. I'm forgetting now. But I spoke with Hugh again. We resolved on the Gator Guard name. And then, right away, he's like, well, I've got two other people to join me. We're each putting in $1 million. So there's $3 million right there. He's like, can you get something out there? And I was like, absolutely. Let's talk about what that messaging should be. And maybe it took us a minute or two, and then he said, click send. And so then it was out there on Twitter and just spreading like wildfire. I headed out of the office to a lunch meeting, and I think within the next 15, 30 minutes, he texts me and calls me saying, we got another $1 million. And then another 10, 15 minutes later, calls me again and says, we got another $1 million. We're at $5 million. Wow. But what is it all about? I mean, the intention of Gator Guard is to live harmoniously with the Gator Collective, whereas the Gator Collective is for every single fan to contribute money monthly or annually and have a subscription to access various content, have opportunities for in-person appearances, so on and so forth. I think a lot of your listeners know what the Gator Collective is all about. This is a bit different. It's supposed to be a very small, exclusive group of high net worth individuals, each pooling or providing money above a certain threshold, and strictly for NIL purposes, and to supplement what the Gator Collective has already accomplished thus far. It is not at all intended to compete whatsoever, but this is really for that really small network of very influential, high net worth people who had traditionally supported the university and the athletic department and will continue to do so. But Hugh leading this effort, just asking more and more of those people to put in money on an annual basis.
Is it working kind of with the collective? I understand that, now with NIL, a lot of these people, especially the bigger donors, are used to sending money either to UF boosters or to UF, and now there's kind of different, maybe even competing hands inside the university. Is this kind of working with the collective in terms of, hey, this is how we can affect NIL?
Very much so. Eddie was very involved as soon as I got the first call from Hugh. And we wrestled with whether or not this should actually be created within the scope of Gator Collective or be this sort of separate organization that just works very closely. And we resolved, at least for the time being, of the latter, that it would be a separate entity that does work very cohesively and in conjunction with the Gator Collective. And so not competitive whatsoever, and perhaps even some money going from one entity to the other, probably Gator Guard to Gator Collective. And they are, Hugh and Eddie and Jed and everyone else involved in Gator Collective, I'm sure they're continuously in conversation to figure out how they can help each other out. I have an echo on my side.
Yeah, just a small echo. Darren, while you're taking a look at that, has the Gator Guard announced kind of what their NIL process is going to be to compensate, not necessarily in dollars, but obviously the Gator Collective has done access with interviews and events and things of that nature. Is the Gator Guard going to be doing similar?
Yeah, look, I mean, importantly, Hugh, just like Eddie at the Gator Collective, absolutely wants to be above board, not to play in the gray and follow the edicts of the NCAA. And it's very basic NIL regulations, and also obviously follow the law of the state of Florida as well. So you're absolutely going to see quid pro quo in every single situation wherever money is being offered to a player. And whereas other groups around the country may be dangling a carrot and offering money to players before they're committed, that's not going to be the case here.
Perfect. And then Darren, I want to just kind of ask, last couple of questions here. I want to ask the state of NIL. We're about a year into it. Obviously, I know that there was the legislative session that passed. No changes were made to the law. But in your opinion, how do you think the state of Florida sits right now, I guess, compared to the law that was originally drafted and kind of the intents of what you guys wanted out of the law and where we're at now? And then how do you compare that to some other, states that maybe have a little bit more, I guess, liberal legislation on what's allowed and what's not? And I don't mean liberal as in Republican or as in Democrat, but maybe just a little bit looser in terms of what they allow.
Well, first of all, audio check. Is this better?
Yeah, much better.
All right. Awesome. So, yeah, look, I mean, it's so interesting going back to the tail end of 2019 now, and us in Florida being a leader in drafting legislation, which, it changed a lot from when it was first drafted, and other bells and whistles were put in that now, after the NCAA came in June 30, 2021, and issued its very bare bones interim NIL policy, which, by the way, 10 months later is still the same exact. So I don't know how interim it is. It was a lot less in terms of regulation and prohibitions than what we have in Florida. And many other states followed our lead and basically drafted similar legislation, some going further. Texas, South Carolina are a couple of states that have even more what I would call oppressive regulations. But yeah, you look at what Alabama did, completely repealing its NIL law because it found that it had a disadvantage compared to schools in states that don't have any NIL law, compared to states that maybe have lesser restrictions. And then you look more recently, states like Mississippi and I believe Tennessee being the latest to alter their own laws to loosen it up a bit, scale back. And there was an attempt this year in Florida. Chip LaMarca, who sponsored the original legislation, sponsored a piece of legislation this year that would have removed the prohibition on schools and athletic departments from causing compensation for athletes. And it never even reached the floor. The House Speaker decided it just was not a priority, and maybe even was against it altogether. I'm not sure. So our legislative session is done. I mean, we just had a special session in Florida to repeal Disney's tax exemption.
Right.
NIL did not come up for anyone who was thinking that it would. So, yeah, nothing's going to change, I don't think, until perhaps the beginning of next year. And maybe that does provide the schools in the state a little bit of a disadvantage, but then you look at what's being accomplished with the Gator Collective, with Gator Guard, and I think we'll be okay.
Darren, where does your opinion fall there when it comes to schools being able to serve as middlemen or intermediaries in securing NIL contracts and deals for players?
I think there's a reason why we don't see it. I mean, so think about the half of the states that don't have an NIL law on the books, and even think about the schools in Alabama now. Are you seeing or hearing any deal making, any procurement of opportunities by the schools themselves? And the answer is no. I think there were some whispers early on, or not even early on, but some time ago when Ohio State came out with some sort of press release indicating almost that it seemed as though the school would get more involved, but I haven't seen that specifically. So I think schools are looking at it and talking internally to their compliance departments, talking internally to their lawyers, and assessing whether the enhanced exposure and increased potential liability is worth it. And the answer, I believe, is a resounding no. And that's true with regard to a lot of athletic directors that I've spoken with across the country who said, even if we're in a state that currently doesn't allow for us to cause compensation, if that changes, we're not going to cause compensation. We're going to be hands off. We'll provide contact information to brands if they want it. We'll help with group licensing by partnering with third-party brands for the purpose of selling jerseys with player names, etc. But we don't want to be out there on the path and reaching out to Gatorade, Jordan Brand, etc., and saying, hey, sponsor this athlete or that athlete, because it just invites unnecessary exposure. And also, I don't think the NCAA would look too fondly upon that.
What do you think, speaking of the NCAA, how do you think they view people like guys like Ruiz and the way they kind of conduct themselves, kind of like a general manager, the way they communicate on social media? What do you think the NCAA would do in situations like that, or how would they will step in? Or would they at all? I don't know.
Yeah, when it comes to the NCAA, I always am fearful to speculate or make any assumptions because it seems like the NCAA always zags when you think it will zig. You know, and just because the NCAA has done nothing over 10 months with regard to enforcement, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden it won't try to make an example out of somebody. And it could very well be the specific circumstance that you mentioned. I mean, I'm sure that the NCAA in Indianapolis is watching every single thing that's occurring and may try to poke holes and make determinations that some deal making is improper and unethical and against their rules. And if that does occur, yeah, you could see certain players be punished. I mean, nothing's going to happen to like a John Ruiz or to Aspire Sports out in Tennessee or any of these entities who are out there or individuals who are doing these deals, unless they're violating state laws, which I don't believe that they are. The concern is if there's a violation of the NCAA rules and regulations, who's going to get hurt? It's the athlete and perhaps the school. But the biggest risk is to the athlete. And so I hope that the athletes are definitely conducting their diligence and making sure that every single contract and offer is above board. Because, you know, I know you mentioned Ruiz, but I think the biggest example, if the NCAA is going to put its foot down, I think that's the Tennessee deal with Mika. Because, yeah, the agreement may say this isn't an inducement, but that doesn't matter. The kid wasn't committed yet. And if you're going to offer the kid, and I shouldn't even call him a kid, but if you're going to offer an athlete, you know, a huge guarantee upon signing, and then upwards of $8 million throughout the term of his enrollment, and he's not yet committed, and he has to perform all these deliverables and obligations in a specific jurisdiction and to the benefit of a specific university, you can call it whatever you want. I think we can all make our own assumptions as to what it is.
Darren, I've got a question on that. Have we yet run into an incident around the country, and I haven't followed closely enough, where a player has signed a contract and did the deliverables, what maybe wasn't given, you know, full payment, and had to sue or bring about any sort of legal action against a collective or an entity that maybe promised something and wasn't able to deliver? Because I feel like we might be seeing some of that in the not too distant future. I just wasn't sure if it happened yet.
Not yet, at least not to my knowledge. And every lawsuit filing is a public document. It's a bit hard sometimes to track them across the country. It's easier when these filings are made in federal court, much more difficult to find state by state and circuit court. But I would think that it would be exposed, and I haven't seen it yet, although that's not all that surprising either. Number one, if it's a small potato deal and there's a breach, it's usually not worth it to either the brand or the athlete to file suit. But all of that said, I have the full expectation that within the next few years, we will see litigation in this space. And it will be very interesting if, let's say, it's a collective that offers 8 figures to an athlete and just doesn't have the money to pay it when it's due. What's the athlete going to do? And I would think the athlete is going to sue. And one thing that I've asked and wondered is, are the athletes considering going beyond just contracting with the collective, or I guess it doesn't really matter as much with solidified brands, but let's stick on collectives. Are they also asking for personal guarantees from the people behind it? Because while the collective may not have assets, a lot of the people who are involved in these collectives do have deep pockets. And so by putting personal guarantees in these contracts, they would add clauses that provide some safety if in fact the deal goes awry.
Yeah, that was just going to be my next question, and maybe final question here is, are the collectives set up, and I'm talking just in generalities here, are a lot of them set up just as individual LLCs, or would there be an opportunity to go after the individual, members or leaders of that collective group where those that are donating or those that are leading the organization would be exposed?
Yeah, by and large, these collectives are being set up as for-profit or not-for-profit entities. And so I think it would be rather challenging for an athlete to pierce the corporate veil and go after the individuals who are a part of it, unless we're talking about an instance where somebody at the collective committed fraud, or it's really a collective that only a single person has created and is backing, and you'd argue that it's an alter ego. But otherwise, as I mentioned before, unless there's some sort of personal guarantee in the language of the agreement, I think it would probably be rather difficult for the athlete to pierce the corporate veil and go after the individuals.
Interesting. Nick, Silk, got any final questions, or else we'll let Darren go? I know that he's got a newborn, so congratulations to you, my friend, and we'll let you run.
What do you rank before you get out here? What do you rank? Where we at now with the new collective with the Guard and them joining the Gator Collective and everything we got going from a Gator perspective? What do you rank us amongst the top NIL programs around the country?
It's a great question, because if you asked me that question 2 weeks ago, I'd say we've done a tremendous job as being a first. In terms of a state where we were a first to have a July 1, 2021 effective date for NIL and having a lead there, being a first and creating a collective. I mean, understand the reason why all these groups are called collectives is because we decided to call our organization Gator Collective. So we were a first there too. I think though, with time, even though Eddie and his crew have done a tremendous job in getting thousands of subscribers and I think roughly $500,000 annualized through subscriptions, we have to be honest and realize that others out there at other schools have raised a lot of money, a lot more than 500,000. So 2 weeks ago, I'd say we're competitive. Now, I'd say we're at the top.
It's amazing what those kind of deep pockets can do in such a short amount of time. It is interesting. I never thought of it that way, though. The Gator Collective was kind of first, and that was because as the NCAA not only dragged their feet, but went kicking and screaming to Congress, and then ultimately, threw their hands up in the air and said it's up to the states. Florida was, one of those first early adopters, and I think Florida did a good job with Eddie and yourself and Jen to kind of kick off the Gator Collective. And I'm looking at a site now and looking through all of these different ones, and man, like Georgia, Grambling has the Icon Collective. Indiana, Kansas, like there's just everyone has something now, and it's just funny to hear you say, they're called collectives because the Gator Collective was first.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what is a collective? I bet at least half the groups out there probably never even looked up the definition of a collective. They just decided to be a collective because of what was started in Gainesville. So it's pretty interesting.
That's awesome.
Michigan won't like it, but the leaders and the best. There you go. Put that on the Gator Collective.
That's right. That's right. Well, Darren, we appreciate your time, my friend. Best of luck with everything. We'll talk to you soon, my friend.
All right, y'all. Take care.
Thanks.